Another year has started and you're still afraid to teach pronunciation? Many English teachers agree that pronunciation is often one of the trickiest areas to tackle. But what if I told you that focusing on just a few key features could make a huge difference? I'm Rubens Heredia, one of your Pavilion ELT vloggers, and in this video I'll be sharing 5 pronunciation features that you need to start teaching your students today. These features will help them sound more natural, improve their listening skills, and boost their confidence in speaking English. Want to know what they are? So come with me. Teaching pronunciation can feel overwhelming, especially when students come from different language backgrounds. But instead of trying to fix every little sound, we can focus on the features that have the biggest impact on intelligibility and fluency. Mind you, pronunciation is one of the richest and most diverse areas when it comes to English varieties. There's so much variation on how words and sentences are pronounced that it's really impossible for us to say that there is one correct way of doing it. And this is not what this video is about. Instead, I'll try to focus on some features that occur across English varieties and that I feel can have a big impact on students' ability to communicate in English. So let's cut to the chase. When we talk about teaching pronunciation, it's only natural that we immediately think of helping students pronounce the sounds. However, this may not be the only issue at hand. According to Mark Hancock, in fact, there are some aspects of pronunciation which are much more important for listening than they are for speaking. As listeners, they will not be able to avoid hearing them, and it's best for them to be prepared. I'm suggesting that we need to teach pronunciation for listening, and that includes raising awareness of connected speech. Whether you address these pronunciation features in the classroom or not, at what level and for what purpose is really up to you and your students. Just make sure that you are clear on what their objectives are and help them as much as possible. Feature number 1, catenation. Catenation or linking sounds happens when words flow together in natural speech, and it's something that many proficient speakers do without thinking. It is the link between a word that ends in a consonant sound and another that starts with a vowel sound. For example, in the phrase an apple, we don't usually say an and apple separately, we link them together, an apple. Teaching catenation helps students understand why people sometimes seem to eat their words, and it also improves their listening skills as they'll start to recognize these patterns in real conversations. There are many ways we can help our students notice and practice those linking sounds. You can simply write a sentence on the board like I want an apple and show students how the sounds connect. Then have them practice saying it. Mohammed Arul wrote a very interesting article for English Teaching Professional in which he includes lots of suggestions on how to help students with different aspects of connected speech. Here are some of his ideas. When introducing new language, collocation, phrasal verbs, idiomatic expressions, etc., I always present it in the way it would appear in connected speech, and sometimes highlight those features on the board. Every now and then, I ask my students to highlight aspects of connected speech in a text, or ask them to identify how certain chunks of words would sound in casual speech. I do listen and repeat activities to highlight certain aspects of connected speech that I want my students to be able to produce. Feature number 2, rhoticity. If you have never heard of the word rhoticity, don't worry, I'm sure you're familiar with the concept. Rhoticity basically refers to how the R sound is pronounced, especially at the end of the words. In rhotic accents, the R is pronounced clearly, even at the end of the words, for example, car. In non-rhotic accents, the R often merges with the previous vowel, making it longer, but does not sound like an R anymore, for example, car. A lot of teaching materials say that American English is rhotic with clear pronunciation of the R, and British English is non-rhotic, so the R is dropped. However, this is a huge misconception. Many accents common in the United States, such as that of New York, the Deep South, and African American Vernacular English, are largely non-rhotic, whereas some varieties of British English, especially in the north of England and Scotland, do pronounce their R's. Rather than fall for the trap of generalizations, it might be better to help students become more aware of how sounds are pronounced by different people, so they can navigate accents and adapt the pronunciation depending on their goals. Charles Januzzi raised an interesting point in an article for Modern English Teacher. According to him, one complication is that many accents of English are non-rhotic. However, most of these accents will then pronounce the initial R at the onset of the following syllable or word if those would normally start with a vowel sound. For example, although the R may not be pronounced in the isolated word car by my friend Paul, he's likely to pronounce that R when he says the car is here. It just makes it easier to connect the two vowel sounds. Feature number 3, glottal stops. Our glottis is the opening between our vocal folds. A glottal stops is when we briefly stop the airflow in the throat. Glottal stops are common in many English accents, but they can be confusing for learners who aren't used to them. Many people in the UK, for example, tend to not pronounce the T and D sounds when it's between vowels, as in butter instead of butter or waiter instead of waiter. Across the pond, many people in the US also swallow the T at the end of syllables, like in cat or outside, or often an N, as in the word mountain. The presence of such glottal stops can make it difficult for students to understand some varieties of English, but is it worth getting students to use it when they speak? Jonathan Marks asked us an interesting question in an article for English Teaching Professional. How important is it for learners to aim for native-like pronunciation? Setting aside the complicating factor that there are so many different native accents of English to choose from, the fundamental fact is that native-like pronunciation is difficult to achieve, and unimportant for the ever-increasing majority of learners who need to use English as a lingua franca. It can even be counterproductive aim. Some people feel that their accents are an important part of their identity, which they don't want to surrender when they speak English. Feature number 4, weak forms. Weak forms are unstressed versions of common words like to, for, and and. For example, to is often pronounced as t in natural speech. Words that we refer to as content words, such as main verbs, nouns, or adjectives, usually do not have a weak form. However, important grammar words like prepositions, conjunctions, and pronouns often do, and this can cause problems not just for listening but also for writing. For example, the weak form of the preposition of may sound exactly like one of the possible weak forms of the verb to have. This is why it's a common mistake, especially for people whose first language is English, to write should have done instead of should have done. In connected speech, they often sound the same. Although it can be argued that not using weak forms when we speak does not affect our intelligibility as speakers, speakers who don't use it might end up sounding overly formal or robotic in their own speech. According to Polina Gordyshevskaya in an article for English Teaching Professional, while in some contexts this might not be necessary, there are many other contexts where fluency is crucial. To use the features of connected speech or not is up to our learners, but our task as teachers is to equip them with the necessary skills so once our students have understood what happens in fast speech and why, they can try producing it. For this purpose, nothing better has been invented than drills and imitation. So there you have it, 4 pronunciation features that can transform your students' understanding in speaking. Focusing on these key areas, you help your students sound more natural, understand their interlocutors better, and feel more confident in their speaking skills. But I'd love to hear from you. Which of these features do you already teach? Do you have any tip or activities for teaching them? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to follow me on all social media at WhatIsELT. Keep learning and keep teaching.